each time. I just say the word be, and I'll ring the bell 3 times. And then we'll sit together for about 7 minutes or so. 10 minutes. I'll ring the bell once, we'll bow, and then we'll say the Lord's Prayer together very slowly. And Mary, Mother of Contemplatives, pray for us, and 2 Christian mystics pray for us to bear witness. We're sitting together in the Christian tradition of mystical transformation in God. So that's the practice. And I want to add one more thing. I got thrown off here about the time, and I have a hard time processing at that level of reality anymore in my own life. And also, I'm keenly aware that Pat Wall's in the hospital. An ambulance took him to his wife is with him. He's in crisis. And so somehow and also I find out you need me to talk a little louder, a little clearer. I'm used to speaking on Riverside, so I will do that, especially the end of my words. I'll try to enunciate more consistently. But my enunciation, the confusion over time and past in the hospital, this is the poignancy of God's oneness in our lives. It's just like this. So with that said, then, we'll do a sit. I invite you to sit straight and fold your hands and bow. Repeat after me. Be still and know I am God. Be still and know I am. Be still and know. Be still. Be. Wow. Slowly say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Mary, Mother of Contemplatives, pray for us. Saint John of the Cross, pray for us. Saint Teresa of Avila. Amen. So he's inviting them. By the way, in practicing centering prayer, which we're going to, I know some of you practice centering. Anyone can practice centering. Anyone can take a word and cling to it with all your. Anyone can practice it. It's a lovely way to pray. But the way you're experiencing it bears witness to where you are in the journey. You say, I love practicing centering prayer because it helps me be more grounded, helps me be more present, helps me to be more tender-hearted, helps me to be more open. Uh, then you're still in this special way of life. It deepens your devotional sincerity this way. But he's speaking of here, and then do that, efficacious unto holiness. But he's talking about, or he says that he says his special way of life leads to the singular way. And the singular way is this. He said, I see now that you live in the very core of your being with this kind of intimate necessity, the imperative of your awakening heart, to surrender and give yourself over to unveiled union with God, transcending your thoughts, transcending your emotions, transcending your feelings, so that even though you're not dead yet physically, you can begin to experience God in an unveiled way, beyond thought, beyond memory, beyond emotions, beyond the body, is a foreshadowing, is a quiet inner urgency. He said these first three ways, the common way of living the Christian life, the special way, devotional sincerity, and this urgency quickened by a desire not to wait until you're dead, to live in unveiled infinite union with the infinite. All of these come and go and they pass away with time. He said, but the thing about the singular way, this inner urgency of your heart, this imperative of this oneness, will go on throughout all of eternity because it's a foreshadowing of eternal life. That is, even though you're still here in time, you're just a human being. But somehow you've already crossed over into this eternal life. I want to share a personal example of this. My wife, Maureen, she died of Alzheimer's 3 years ago. She died right here in the living room. I sit next to her ashes every day while I write. And when in my memoir, I began my memoir, I was sitting by her bedside as she was dying. And I told her, I think she could still hear me. She couldn't open her eyes or she couldn't, I think she could hear me. I told her that sitting there with her while she was dying, it reminded me of something when I was a novice, an old lay brother died. I was 18 years old at the time. And they lay the body out and the monks pray over the body all night. It's the first time I saw a dead person. I remember that. And Merton gave a talk to the novices about death. He said, it's really helpful to remember that when we die, we don't go anywhere when we die. We don't orbit the earth a few times and take off and go to God at some far off place. Because Scripture tells us that in God we live and move and have our being. We're living our life in the vast interiority of God. So all the angels are here. The deathless presence of all who have died are here. It's all right here. And we don't see this in ego consciousness. We look around, but in meditative states, in interior meditative states, you can see the dead. That is, in meditative states, you can realize your own deathless presence is already one with their deathless presence, hidden with Christ and God forever beyond the origins of the universe. See, that's the mystical experience. This way. And so he's saying you've been touched with a moment of awakening, with the setting sun, the arms of the beloved, reading a child a good night story, lying awake at night, whatever it is, you were touched with oneness. This oneness has given rise to a desire to abide in the oneness so fleetingly glimpsed. The God-given godly nature standing up and sitting down this way. And so you desire to abide there because you know that in that moment, it isn't as something more was given to you, but rather in that moment, you fleetingly taste it, the abyss-like nature of what every moment is. I want to give another example of this. Imagine a stone falling in water. And imagine that the water which the stone is falling is abyss-like, it's bottomless. And so the stone is falling, 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 falling forever into bottomless depths. And the water at the bottomless depths in which the stone is falling alongside an underwater cliff. And there's little protrusions that stick out here and there along the cliff. And every so often, the stone lands on one of those protrusions and it momentarily pauses in its descent. And in the undulations of the water, you go rolling off, you continue on falling, 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 falling. And imagine you are that stone. And imagine that right now you're falling forever into the bottomless abyss of God. And imagine that every so often you land somewhere. Oh, I think I'll go to college and major in this, or maybe not. I think I'll marry this person, maybe not. I think this will work. I think I'll have a baby, or maybe not. I think I'll go into this industry or this thing, or maybe not. And for a while, it seems you get stabilized in that place. You get all caught up in it. But in love found and love lost, and the unraveling of things, you go rolling off, falling, 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 until you land again. It goes on and on. And here you are right now. Here we are right now, pausing in the descent, this little protrusion this way. And then you can realize this, the bottomless abyss of as you fall deeper and deeper into ever deeper dimensions of yourself, the deepening dimensions of yourself drop down into and open out upon the abyss-like depths of God. And the abyss-like depths of God is welling up and giving the infinity of itself away in the concreteness of this moment that you're sitting here right now. And in that awareness, you're a mystic. And you're a momentary mystic. You say, yes, I have been a momentary mystic. Sitting before this, sitting with the setting sun, holding a newborn infant in my lap, sitting at the deathbed of the dying loved one, smelling a flower. Watch a child run by laughing, going past your house. You glimpse and you taste something of the sacredness of this. And in that moment, I realized that just for a moment, that it's really true. So that's why I was saying that Jesus says, you have eyes to see, but you don't see. What if we could all close our eyes right now and be interiorly awakened? So that when we opened our eyes, we'd see through our own awakened eyes what Jesus saw and all that he saw. What would we see? We'd see God. Because Jesus saw God in all that he saw. And what's so stunning about it is it doesn't matter whether Jesus saw his own mother or a prostitute. It didn't matter whether he saw the joy of those gathered at a wedding or the sorrow of those gathered at the sorrow of a burial of a loved one. It didn't matter whether Jesus saw his own disciples or his executioners. It didn't matter whether he saw a flower or a bird. Jesus saw God in all that he saw. And Jesus says, you have eyes to see, but you do not see. There is your God-given capacity to see the God-given godly nature shining bright, to love found and love lost, breathing in and breathing out. But you have eyes to see, but you don't see it. And that's the source of all your sorrow. This is the source of all your fear. This is the source of all the traumatizing things you do to yourself and other people and to the earth. And so the prayer is, Lord, that I might see. And then you say, that is, I might realize. And you say, you know what, Lord, I have seen, I have realized. And my faith, I know it's true. And I sat with the setting sun. I listened to my breathing. I sat with the beloved. I smelled the flower. I gave myself over to the students with all my heart. I gave myself over. It's the way of the artist. It's the way of the poet. It's the way of the musician. It's the way of patience and long suffering. This way I have seen. But it's evasive. It comes and it goes. And so what I'm looking for is how do I be stabilized in it? And so this is what the author of The Cloud of Unknowing says, and this is the singular way. He says, you know yourself that at one time, this is still chapter 1, you know that yourself at one time you were caught up in the common matter in the Christian life and a day-by-day mundane existence along with your friends. But I think the eternal love of God, which once created you out of nothing and then redeemed you from Adam's curse through the sacrifice of his blood, could not bear to let you go on living so common a life far from him. And so with exquisite kindness, he awakened desire within you, and binding it fast with the leash of love's longing, drew you closer to himself, what I've called the special manner of living. He called you his friend, and in the company of his friends, you learned to live the interior life more perfectly than was possible in the common way. Is there more? Yes. From the beginning, I think God's love for you was so great that his heart could not rest satisfied with this. What did he do? Do you not see how gently and how kindly he has drawn you on to the third way of life, the singular? Yes, you live now at the deep, solitary core of your being, learning to direct your loving desire to the highest, final manner of living, which I have called the perfect. Chapter 2. Take courage now, frail mortal though you are, and try to understand yourself. And so the singular way of life, see, you live now in a kind of a quiet urgency to abide in the depths so fleetingly glimpsed. You know that these moments of quickening, that something more, it's not something more was given, but a curtain parted. And it was the infinite love of God, infinitely giving the infinity of itself away in and as the immediacy of those moments in which you're quickened by it. This way. I can't explain it, but I know that it's true. Maybe it was very intense, but very often, maybe it was very subtle, like a whisper or a breath this way. And what is awakened within me is the desire to abide there. But how can I do that? Because I can't make these moments happen. No, but I can assume the stance that offers the least resistance to being overtaken by it, which is this is the practice and this is the teaching. So this is centering prayer. So this is the teaching. So what you are to do, and I want to give my version of it for the sake of our, on the I love you prayer. So I love this, what he's saying. Is you sit down in prayer, you open your scriptures, light a candle, whatever helps you in your devotional sincerity. You remind yourself you're sitting in the presence of God, all about you and within you, closer to you than you are to yourself. And then you sit And your word is, he said, take a simple word like Jesus or mercy or love. As you take a word, I'm going to take the word, I love you. I love you. So as you sit there this way, when you inhale, listen to God's silent, I love you. The infinite presence of God is exhaling itself and pouring the infinity of itself out and giving itself away to you in and as the gift of your very presence in your nothingness without God. So you exhale God's silent, I love you into your heart. And then when you exhale yourself in love. That is, when you exhale, return to God, say, I love, exhale your I love you to God. Because in the reciprocity of love, destiny is fulfilled. So you inhale this love, is given, which is, we're exhaling the infinite love of God in the breath. And then when we exhale ourselves into love. Then in the next inhalation, it'll give itself to us. So in the rhythm of the breath, destiny is fulfilled. And that's the practice. Now, as you sit there that way, let's say you're going to sit for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. That's your intention. And so you're sitting this way in the I love you prayer. You'll notice that as you sit there in real life, what happens is that thoughts arise in your mind. And become aware of thoughts arising and falling away within you. But do your best not to think about the thoughts that arise. Because if you think about the thoughts that arrive, you'll be carried off by thought again. Rather, as you're aware of thought arising and falling within you, silently say, I love you. 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 And habitually ground yourself in the radicality of the love incarnate in your breath, of the wholehearted sincerity of this love. And little by little by little, the thinking you and all that it thinks is quietly transcended in this love. You sit there a little bit longer and feelings arise. Maybe you're sad about something. Maybe you're sad about something. And you have reasons to be sad. Something's happening. It's very sad. So when you inhale God's silent, I love you, infinitely giving the infinity of itself to you, sadness and all, finding no hindrance in your sadness of being infinitely in love with you. And when you exhale yourself, give yourself in love, sadness and all, to the love that's giving itself to you, sadness and all. So it isn't as if in your thinking, the thoughts don't arise and fall. And you don't get carried off by it too. You're just a human being. I wonder what's for lunch. That kind of, what life is. Uh, but what you do is every time you inhale, listen to God being infinitely in love with you, giving itself to you in the midst of your distracted ways. God finds no hindrance in your distracted mind to being infinitely in love with you. And then when you give yourself in the midst of your distractions to the love that loves you into your distractions, the distractions cease to have tyranny over you. And likewise with your emotions, it isn't, there is the sadness. Maybe it's very sad. But you can learn to be free from the tyranny of sadness in the midst of sadness, because you're sustained in a love that sustains you so in sadness. Maybe you feel concerned about the outcome of a future event. It's very weighty for you. I think of Pat Wall's wife right now at the hospital. The hearts can go out to her, to him. Of an unresolved matter. And it weighs on you. So when you inhale, listen to God's silent, I love you, being infinitely in love with you in the midst of the unresolved matter of your heart, finding no hindrance in your unresolved concern to being infinitely in love with you. And when you exhale yourself in love, in unresolved matters in all, giving yourself to the love that's giving itself to you, unresolved matters at all. And little by little or all at once, you can be strangely free from the tyranny of circumstance as hindering this infinite love that utterly transcends and permeates the very circumstance that you're in this way. And you're quickened by it like this. little by little, all at once. Here's an image of this. Imagine that it's in the middle of the night, and imagine you're lying in your bed at night and you're dying, and you know that you're dying, and you turn and you see the flowers silhouetted in the moonlight on the windowsill. And you turn as you look at the flower, they seem to know all about it. This way, just like that. And so that's that. That's it. And what really I think what the cloud of knowing is all about is maybe realizing that here's another way that I put it. Here's another way that I put it is that we realize that the very things on which we tend to base our security and identity, which I do too, our physical health or lack thereof, our intimacy needs or lack thereof, feeling secure about what tomorrow holds or lack thereof, our particular career or ministry or work or lack thereof. The very things on which we tend to base our opinion of ourselves or in the eyes of others or lack thereof, on which we tend to base our security and identity. If we look at them very, very closely, they're all ephemeral. They're all ephemeral. They're all fleeting. And the you that's identified with those things is fleeting. Because 1,000,000 years from now, all of us here will have been dead for almost 1,000,000 years. A whisper. And so the issue is, how can I find in the fleetingness of all that's endlessly passing away the love that never passes away? See, how can I realize that as I approach my own death, that in approaching my own death, I can taste within me the eternality of myself that never dies this way? And how can I know it not just theoretically or know it poetically, but how can I viscerally be established in it? And not just fleetingly, that moment that it grazed my heart, but how through this prayer can I learn to be more habitually stabilized in it as I go through my day? Now, that's the practice. That's the practice. And so it's a calling. You know, I mean, if you're called to do it, not everyone's called to do this. A lot of people efficacious unto holiness in the special way of life. It's a gift. And the common way is a gift too. And the word became flesh and dwelt among us. It isn't as if it's kind of this way. This is who Jesus is, maybe one way of looking at all of this is that, yes, it's true in our waywardness that we're exiled to the mystery of the fall. We're exiled. There's a traumatized capacity to be habitually abiding in the love that sustains us all, that alone is ultimately real. And it's true, we're exiled from it. We're already late for the next meeting. We don't know how this is going to turn out. We turn this way. It's really true this way. So God's response to us in our dilemma, the word became flesh and dwelt among us. And God walked with us to reveal that we're unexplainably precious in the very midst of our dilemma. Here's another image of this that helps me to see this. You know, when you look at the healing stories in the gospel, each one is different. But in a way, they're all the same in a way. They're variations of the same. Jesus spent all nights in prayer, established in this oneness with God, in whom he is the oneness of God, is the Logos with the Word. And he would come out in the morning, walking the earth, looking to deliver people from suffering. And when the word got out, the suffering came to him. My daughter died. I'm a prostitute. I have leprosy. I'm a whatever it is. And Jesus saw, as they approached him, Jesus saw that the root of the foundations of their trauma wasn't that they had leprosy. It wasn't that they were a prostitute. It wasn't that they couldn't walk. It wasn't that they couldn't see. That wasn't the root of it. The root of it is they thought they were what was wrong with them. They thought that their conditioned state that they were then had the authority to name who we are. And Jesus says, he knew it wasn't true. That love and love alone has the authority to name who we are. So here's the poetic image of the healing. And I think it's the healing that happens in deep prayer. Jesus is standing there with the person in their suffering. And Jesus responds in a dramatic way. The lame walk, the blind see. This way. The daughter dies, raises from the dead. This way. Stunning. And Jesus said, I did this that you might believe the true miracle. They were stunned by it. Then what is the true miracle? And this is the true miracle, as I see. Jesus is standing there with the person in their suffering. And really, it's you and it's me. We're standing there in the presence of Jesus in the midst of our suffering. You have the unresolved matter in your heart. I have the unresolved matters of my heart. And we're sitting there with Jesus. And Jesus says that, and this is just between Jesus and ourselves. Jesus says to you, I know you. I know who you are. From all eternity, God contemplated you and me before the origins of the universe. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And God, when God created you, God did not have to think up who you might be. From all eternity, God eternally contemplated who you are, hidden with Christ in God forever. And that's everything in God is God. This is the divinity of you that was never born. Because God has never, never, never not known who you eternally are. And the you that was never born is you that will never die. Because it's eternal. It's eternal this way. But we're caught in circumstance. See, we're hypnotized by the conditioned state as if it has the final say in who we are this way. But reflected in Jesus' eyes, we see our true face. There's no fear there. There's no fear there. This is salvation. This is the gift of salvation. God is a presence that delivers us from nothing, even as God unexplainably sustains us in all things. That's the mysterious thing. God doesn't take the suffering away. God depends on us to do our best to not be a source of the suffering. That's the moral imperative. And when the suffering is there, God depends on us to do our best to lessen it or to be set free from it. That's the moral imperative. But to do so grounded in a peace is not dependent on the outcome of our effort, because by human standards, it may go down in flames. That's not the point. Jesus died on the cross. You know, it says in the Gospels that when Jesus died, they pierced his heart with a lance, and blood and water flowed out like at the birth of a child. And then there was no more Jesus left in Jesus. And then the only Jesus that was ever really there is manifested throughout the whole world. And Jesus says, come follow me. It sounds like a good idea. Do you see where he's taking us? What is the mystery of the cross? It's the crucifixion of our cherished and dreaded illusions that anything less than an infinite union, the infinite love of God, will ever be enough to put to rest the restless longings of our heart. It's the crucifixion of that illusion, because it's not true. This infinite deathless love shimmers and shines bright in the midst of the unresolved matters right now as you're listening to me, in the midst of unresolved matters this way. It's true. It's really true. We can't explain it. We can't explain it. And so we were grazed by it. It grazed our heart. And grazed by it, it left us with a desire to abide there. And so this is the prayer by which it abides. And at the end of each sit, you ask for the grace as you go through your day, not to break the thread of that ever-present abiding, the rise and the fall of it all. This way. And you'll see that it breaks many times, but you trust it never breaks from God's sin. The next morning you sit down again, you light your candle, you bow, and you say to God, where were we yesterday, Lord? Oh, I remember this way. I love you, 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 I love you. And when it falls into silence, surrender to the silence. To share two examples of this to me. You might want to practice this literally and try. You have to be called to do it, or just look at it poetically. Imagine the suggestion would be that you would go to your room an hour before sunset. And you take off your shoes and put them by the door. You'd prop a pillow on the floor against a wall looking at facing an open window. And you would sit on the floor and get kind of situated against the pillow, put your head back against the wall and settle an hour before sunset. And surrender yourself over to the sovereignty of day's end. No one speeds it up and no one slows it down. Because if you go to your room for any other reason, you may or may not make it. If you go to your room to figure something out, maybe you will, maybe you won't. If you go to your room to be virtuous, you might be virtuous, maybe not. If you go to your room for anything at all, you may or may not make it. But if you sit there to be one with God in the sovereignty of the setting sun, home every night, because the sun is setting. And God might say to you, I'll be God talking, where have you been? Where have you been? This way. I'm so glad to see you coming this way. And you put your head back against the wall and you maybe you use a word with a prayer, maybe not. And what you'll discover is you'll discover yourself in your mind running away from the sovereignty of day's end, the grocery list, because you can't bear the intimacy of it. There's nothing to hold on to. There's nothing to hold on to this way. And every time you realize that you're running away, you bring yourself back again to the sovereignty of the setting sun. And you sit like that. And continue sitting that way for 1 full hour after it's completely dark. So you've been there for about 2 hours. Your back hurts, your neck hurts, your butt hurts, your legs hurt. You've been bored 10,000 times. And sit there like this and look around your room like the shadowy outline. This might be the room you've been falling asleep in every night for years. And you maybe can make out the shadowy outline of your shoes by the door, maybe a coffee cup on the table with a spoon in it, a book by your bedside with a bookmark in it. Maybe this is the first time that you've been one with God's oneness with you in the darkness of your own room, and God's been with you in this darkness every night from the day you were born. And it's like homecoming. It's like homecoming. Slowly get up, very slowly. Be careful, you've been sitting there for a while. And without turning on any lights, take off all your clothes. Get into bed and go to sleep. Not a bad way to end the day, I'd say. It's almost as if the union we're looking for is not hard to find. It's just hard to stop running from it. Thomas Merton once said, we can't, he said, maybe what we're most, Jungian analyst said this, perhaps what we're most terrified of is joy, because there's no control in joy. I can bear being conditionally loved, but I cannot bear God being infinitely in love with me in the midst of my unresolved matters of my broken heart. Here's an example I use from the Merton Reflections. Imagine you have a temper. Everyone has some, we're all working on something, and you're quick to anger, and you feel bad about it, you're working on it, you still get triggered. For St. Paul, this is a thorn in the flesh. He doesn't tell us what it was. He says, the things I want to do, I don't do. I know God wants, the things I don't want to do, I do. I have a thorn in the flesh. I asked God to remove it, and God said, leave it there. It's where you depend on my mercy on you in your frailty this way. And so it's so hard to stop running from it this way. But in certain moments, notice, we're fleetingly delivered from the flight. With the setting sun, the arms of the beloved, with the child, the smell of the flower, we're fleetingly delivered from it. And we can be called to a daily practice to be more habitually established in the great deliverance. Jesus looking into our eyes, I know you. Before the origins of the universe, Jesus tells us, I contemplated you, hidden with Christ and God before the origins of the universe. And this you that was never born, because God has never not known who you are in me, Jesus says, will never die, because God will never not know who you are in me. This is salvation. This is salvation this way. It's a poetic image. If you were seeing me once a week or every month in spiritual direction, we would talk about that because it's personal. Like, where are you at with this? I mean, seriously. How's this strike you? And if you were seeing me in spiritual direction, I wouldn't mention any of this. I'd listen to you first, and I would join you on where you are. And so that I see you, dear one, and I'm here for you. We would kind of see where it takes us. I like to give another image of this to me. Oh, I used to see Thomas Merton in spiritual direction, one-on-one spiritual direction, for an hour every other week. It was very grace time. I saw him as an awakened mystic teacher. Really, I just out of high school, and I just felt so honored, like to be with him. And as I look back at all our times together, it seemed that all of our sessions together, and this is why I see things as a contemplative clinician, how I see psychotherapy. It seems that they were all carried out under the auspices of three questions. The first question would be this, is how's it going? What's it like living here? Really, when the bell rings at 2:30 in the morning to get up, do vigils in the middle of the night to chant the Psalms, how is that with you? How about this cloistered contemplative silence, the long walks alone in the woods, the quiet hours of prayer, the struggle? Do you feel you belong here? Does it sit well with you? Talk to me. Like, be real with me. Where are you at with the ups and downs of things? He'd always ask that. His next question was this: how's it going in your surrender to God, who quickened your heart and brought you to this place that God might transform you into the infinity of Himself? How's it going? Seriously, how's it going? And the third question was, how's it going in discovering the depth of the second question, percolating up through the messy details of the first question? Because you're just a human being this way. Thomas Merton, uh, he was talking to the monks in the monastery. He said, we're all walking around. He said, we all came here with high hopes, cloistered life, seeking God, monk. And he said, we're all walking around disgruntled because when you're living here, you realize half the people in here are crazy. That is, this cloistered neurotic tendencies of the community. And you're one of them. You're one of them. He said, but then you see some old monk coming slowly down the cloister towards you. He said, like a transparent child. And you know that he's found what you came here looking for. So Merton once said, the monastic life is designed to nurture, and everything is carefully crafted to nurture this oneness. And they believe their hidden life of silence touches the whole world in ways we don't understand. Thomas Merton had insomnia. And he talks about lying in the bed at night, he can't sleep. He says suddenly the bed becomes an altar. And in a distant city somewhere, someone is suddenly able to pray. He said, but there are people living in the world who are being called to these unitive states, and they have no one to help them understand what's happening to them and how to cooperate with it. And when I left the monastery, I still very much wanted to live this way. I got married, I had 2 children. And I found that was true. And I started leading silent weekend retreats around the United States and Canada, several times in Europe. And I think what they were drawn to, these are people out in the world, married people, divorced people, college students. Most of them are Catholic, Protestant, Jews. Some didn't have any religious at all, recovering alcoholics, whatever. Everyone's invited. They were drawn because they heard it was going to be, the meals were going to be eaten in silence, and the whole weekend would be in silence. Next, they were told there were going to be 3 half-hour sits a day. In the morning, we're going to sit for half hour, in the middle of the day, and at night. And they would be encouraged to do more sitting if you want to. And in the talks, I will speak from my heart about these mystics that have transformed my life and how the light that shines out from their teaching is shining on them in the middle of their living room, in the middle of the home that they live. And how can they walk the walk and walk the walk? And I'm doing it right now with you this way. How can I live a more contemplative way of life in the midst of today's world? How can I learn to not play the cynic and doubt the stirrings of my own awakening heart? And how can I learn to be surrendered over to it as a poetic response to God being endlessly surrendered over to me in the midst of the unresolved matter of my ways. And how can I learn to live this way, like this? So I think really this is the way. This is the path. And I think in the next talk, I want to talk about two other mystics and how they speak of this, Teresa of Avila. And I want to talk about St. John of the Cross and maybe a little bit on Eckhart. And then turning to the mystics, the whole series. And so each mystic has his or her own voice. But what really matters is this, is where are you at with this when you hear me talking like this? Really. I want to share a story. I'll end with this image. When I was in the monastery, I would see Merton for spiritual direction. He had to get permission to read different books. And I asked if I could read St. John of the Cross. And I got permission. He said, you can read St. John of the Cross. And I never read John of the Cross before. And I walked out along this little country road there, and there was a huge farm there at the monastery. And I had my copy of John of the Cross. I had my rosary. And I walked out into the woods, and I sat at the base of a tree. And sitting at the base of a tree, I opened up to the opening paragraph of John of the Cross. And the music of it. When I could tell it was so beautiful, most of them went right over my head. There's something about the musical quality and depth of it. It like entered my body, like it touched me so this way. And what was interesting is this. John of the Cross lived in the 16th century. I just left Thomas Merton, and it's the same voice. It's the same voice. It's the voice of mystics down through the ages. And now it's our turn. It's our turn to be quickened this way and to walk this walk and to live this way in the midst of the circumstances, in which we find ourselves this way. And so this is the thing, I think, really. I think that days like this are meant to be days of kind of renewing and re-energizing our desire to not let the complexities of the day sweep us away, and to be fidelity to a daily rendezvous in which there's no agenda. See, here I am, Lord. Here I am. And God says, well, here I am. Here I am. And that you, in the sincerity of the time with God, and then when it ends, ask for God not to break the thread as you go through the day. Because in a certain way, this way of which I speak is beyond the darkness of this world. And it radicalizes our oneness with the world this way. And I'll end with this little image. As part of my doctoral training, we worked in different populations. And I worked as a psychological intern at a VA hospital. And I did one rotation on dementia and stroke. And I was to see somebody to do a mental status exam, someone who had brought in had a stroke. And I had my tests with me for assessing the measure of the loss of the cognitive impairment. And when I read his chart before I went in, and this person was a minister who taught Greek and Hebrew in the seminary. So he was fluent in biblical Greek, biblical Hebrew. He was a pastor. And when I went in to see him, he was sitting up in bed, a kind of distinguished looking white-haired guy sitting there in bed. I came in and introduced myself. He said hi to each other. And I said, I had some questions for you. What year is this? And he said, I know that. I just can't think of it right now. It's okay. We were in California at the time, Loma Linda, California. What state are we in? I know that. I was born here. It's okay. Who's president of the United States? Oh, I voted for. I know. And then he looked at me and he said, look what's happened to me. And just before you came in here, I wet the bed. And I thought, my God, Jesus. See, what's the holiness of that? Well, what's the subtle grace that shimmers and shines in the fragility of it all like this? And how can I be present to it, and one with it, and walk with it that we're all woven into each other. That my suffering doesn't belong to me. Your suffering doesn't belong to you. We're all woven together in our suffering. And in our suffering, we're woven together in the infinite love that loves us so and sustains us in our suffering, day by day, breath by breath, breath by breath, heartbeat by heartbeat. And this is the way. This is the teaching. So let's end on that note. And uh, and we do have another 5 minute sit, if I understand correctly. 5 minutes. What I want to do, because it's just 5 minutes, I'm just going to ring the bell once, and we'll sit for 5 minutes, and I'll ring the bell once, and we'll bow again. Like you sit straight. I understand it. We'll have a dialogue, kind of an exchange, I believe, for 10 minutes, I believe. Does anyone have any questions or concerns or clarifications about anything?
As a CAC graduate, I want to thank you again, and thank you for modeling us what it is to be an apostle of love. So tomorrow I have another birthday, and looking around the room, I notice there's a few of us that are already in this stage. I'm loving this stage, but it also took me by quite surprise. So I'm wondering if you might be able to share with us just some thoughts on aging.
Sure.
Thank you.
At 81 years old, I'll be happy to talk about aging. Here's what I tell people. Here's what I say about aging. I feel Marina's dead. So I would say I miss her so. And so there's a certain kind of sadness. But also, as it's mellowed, I sense her deathless presence is one with me. This way. So there's a kind of a quiet sadness with presence in it. I also feel fragile, very fragile. Mentally, my intuitive mind is as transparent as ever. But like time, for example, being thrown by time, and I get confused easily. I rarely leave the house. I'm kind of housebound. I can't drive anymore. I do some flying, some retreats, but I have to have a companion. I get confused at the airport. I get overwhelmed and I get confused this way. And so I have the Turning to the Mystics podcast. It's a gift I get to teach right from my home, teach from my heart. And I live here in this, the ocean's right outside the window where Marina and I lived for 30 years this way. So I think I feel old, and I have to lay down around 10 times a day. I get tired. I'm up in the middle of the night several hours at a time, walking around in the dark. So I would say I feel alone, and I feel sad. I feel fragile. I'm immensely grateful for the years that I've had with Maureen, and I still share it interiorly. My two daughters, it's so dear how close we've become. My oldest daughter's a hospice nurse. My youngest daughter, they call me every day. They visit every weekend, and they take me to the grocery store and to my doctor's appointments this way. So I feel old, lonely, sad, fragile, and I feel amazed and grateful. That's how I feel. Really. I just feel so. I look back at my life, I could not have planned it if I tried. Seriously. Jesus, go figure, honestly. And that's how I feel this way. I like it. Richard Dwyer says, the trouble is there's not enough old people who are elders. See, in indigenous cultures, the elders held the wisdom of the community. That in an atheistic secular society, the old don't know what they're for. They don't know what they're for. And so how do we move from productivity to gratitude? How do we, Thomas Merton once said, some people never see a tree till they're ready to saw it down. They don't see themselves except as a commodity to be used, hence the fear of not keeping up, hence the fear of not being able this way. But what happens when the ability to achieve anything unravels on you and you're just left with the presence? And the presence is somehow, see, although dying, I do not die. Can I learn to be so transformed over by this love? How can I learn to die to everything? How can I die to everything less than the infinite love of God for me? That when I physically die, my physical death in the mail is already on its way. Can I learn? Is it possible that when I physically die, nothing will happen? I mean, obviously something will happen. I'll be dead. But nothing will happen, that I've interiorly died to everything less than the infinite love of God, permeating out through and incarnate in every passing moment of my life, including this moment right now. And so that's what it means for me. That's what it is for me to be old.
Hi, I'm Kathy.
Yeah.
Can you see me as well as? Okay, good. I can barely talk after what you just said. What really struck me so far is in your first talk about the sunset, that I do a lot of stopping and looking at beautiful nature, but I don't think of it giving itself to me. I don't think of it that way. And I think I'm missing something really important. But when I think about it, there really is like fear and trembling to think of being that open to everything, life is offering me.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I'll respond to this. People have said this to me in spiritual direction. They'll say, one prayer I'm afraid to say is "Thy will be done." God just might take me up on it. It's like God said, "You asked for it." It's like, oh no, God's will. Like but to realize that the surrendering over ourselves to God's will is the only true security there is, because it's infinite. Yet in our finite mind, we fear it so, because we can't see past the finiteness of ourselves. So I know what you mean. I'll briefly respond one more thing. We'll hope it helps. There's somebody who's writing I like a lot recently, Jean-Luc Mariot. He teaches at the University of Chicago, and he's a theologian, phenomenologist. And he has this lovely insight. He says that if you're looking at a tree, the beauty of a tree, he said to realize when you look at the beauty, you can see the beauty of the tree because the beauty of the tree is giving itself to you. It's givenness. It's givenness. And when it's given, we receive it as a gift, like we're taken by it. And he has what he calls saturated phenomena. He said, no matter how much you know about trees, you might be a botanist, know all about trees. There's always something about the presence of the tree that's ever infinitely beyond all your insights into it. He calls it saturated phenomena. See, that it's saturated with a plenitude of divinity that's beyond what can be explained, and it touches us so this way. And so what we're trying to move toward, to be ever more habitually established in that. Just be open to it. How it's giving itself to it. And really, it's the infinite love of God giving itself to us incarnate in and as the darkness of the night. Listening to our own breathing, the smell of a flower. This way, this kind of, this helps me to be touched by the truth of words like this. Yeah. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Jim. I'm Debbie.
Hi, Debbie.
I recently heard something that kind of hit me, and it was about how when we look at our future and we worry about it, it's because we're not seeing God's hand in there. And so I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah. I'm saying this as a therapist too, but also,
Okay.
a lot of anxiety is anticipatory anxiety. I heard once, and it's true, that say someone, a car like flips over on the freeway, terrible crash, and the ambulance comes, and they have to use the jaws of life to get the door open. And as they're pulling you out of the car, they're putting you on the gurney. You look up and say, "Will I walk again?" A lot of anticipatory. But notice when you're actually in it, it's terrible. And by the way, it might be terrible. Trauma, I've been there. But notice that when you're actually in it, and if you wait and stay open, there's a certain light that shines in it because you're being sustained unexplainably. And I want to add something else to be truthful about this. You're not necessarily sustained in a way that you're going to make it, because not everybody makes it. But you are sustained, and then when you die and cross over, you're eternally sustained. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talks about the stages of dying. She says when you first get the terminal diagnosis, there's denial. You can't believe death applies to you. Then there's bargaining. God, if you would just let me live longer and get cured, I promise. I'll do this and this. Then when the bargaining doesn't work, you get angry. And then when you get angry, you go into a state of depression. She says, this is the ego coming to the end of itself. And she sat with dying people for years. Her oldest daughter is hospice nurse. She said that some people come to what she calls acceptance. And she's not everyone comes to acceptance. But what acceptance is, it's what acceptance is you know that when you're looking into the face of the dying loved one, their face is the gate of heaven. It's freedom from the tyranny of death in the midst of death. And you can tell you're in the presence of something that matters very much and you can't explain it this way. And so this is what we're really looking for, that the trauma, the root of trauma or the wound isn't the traumatizing things that can and sometimes do occur to all of us, big and small, this way. That's not the deep, nor is the deepest trauma the traumatizing effects of that with flashbacks and self-loathing and ritualistic reenactment. All you know what therapy, you know what it's like. I have my struggle, you have yours. The deepest trauma is a traumatized capacity to be experientially sustained in the love that's infinitely in love with us, in the unfolding of our each passing moment of our life, on up to and including the moment of our death and beyond. So the more I'm healed from that traumatization, it's the depth from which I draw the courage to be present to the trauma that has found their way into my body, into my mind. And I do my best to heal and be delivered in a peace that's not dependent on the outcome of my efforts, because it's the peace of God on which everything depends. So anyway, thank you. That's fine.
Thank you very much.
Help me out schedule-wise. Somebody can be there. What's next?
I think that's the end of the questions for now.
Oh, very good. What's next? And now what happens?
What's
Back to
next
you again.
is the third
Go ahead.
conference.
All right, do we go right into the next talk?
Right. We'll go into conference 3 now.
Wonderful. Before we go to conference 3, we're going to take a little mini break. It'll be very short. I got to go get a book. It's in so it'll be a providential time to just. Maureen used to say to me, she says, you can't keep a contemplative waiting. Because the very midst of what you're waiting for, you're already in the midst of what's more than enough. So just please wait. Be right with you. I gotta go get my book. I can't see. There you are. Good. Um, I know it by heart. I'll just share it. Next reflection on the mystics. Uh, Kirsten Oates, who helps me in the Turning to the Mystics podcast, we go through these mystics. We started doing poets as mystics. We had T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets. And we just finished Gabriel Marcel, the philosopher's mystic. And well, then we're going to go into different world like that. And we're working on this book on the art of discernment and the Enneagram. You're familiar with the Enneagram. So I'd like to share with you a discernment at the psychological level, at the religious level, and at the mystical level of discernment, which is at the heart of these teachings. Here it is at the psychological level. What is the art of discernment? What does this mean? Here's an example of discernment, the intimacy of discernment. It comes to us first as an insight, an awareness. Discernment comes to us in the midst of becoming consciously aware that there's dimensions of ourself that we tend not to be aware of. So what's paradoxical about discernment is that actually it's a heightened state of awareness born in becoming aware of the limitations of our awareness. See, I become consciously aware that there's aspects of my own life, really the life of others, reality, that I tend not to be aware of. It's a discerning moment. Discernment deepens when I realize that these aspects of myself that I tend not to be aware of are influencing to various degrees the aspects of myself that I am aware of in ways that I'm not conscious of, and in two directions, either in the direction of unactualized gifts. I'm being called to something or drawn to something, but because I'm unaware of it, it can't bring it out into the open so I can act on it. And also, there could be patterns of internalized trauma and abandonment. I'm ritualistically reenacting hurtful attitudes toward my body, my mind, and towards other people. And I'm not even aware that I'm doing it. This way, I'm ritualistically acting out these survival patterns and projecting them onto people and acting out on them. So I see that in a sense, these aspects of myself then have this potential to actualize more growth. I need to bring them out into the open so I can act on them. And also these hurtful patterns, I need to bring them out into the open so I can do my best to heal them. So I can be on this healing path. And then but when I start to try to do that, it meets with resistance. I then realize it's easier said than done. I say, yes, maybe I do have an actualized potential in creativity, artistry, or creativity of any creative act, or maybe deepening levels of kindness, or deepening levels of caring, or deepening levels of patience and long suffering, or whatever it is. Maybe there are, and maybe I am ritualistically reenacting out things that are hurtful. I can't see. So I want to bring them out into the open to see. This is what therapy is for. Sometimes, you know what, one way of looking at psychotherapy is sometimes you get the feeling that you're in the presence of someone who's more present to you than you are. That is, they can see in you aspects of yourself that you can't yet see. And in the alliance, which makes it safe, you start to have faith in their faith in you. You start to have faith. So it arcs over, and by sharing the insights, they enhance your self-knowledge. Know thyself this way. It meets with resistance. So then the next level of discernment, well, why does it meet with resistance? Like, why? Well, why resist such a thing? And I think the discernment is this. That if I discover a potential of service and education or teaching or helping or service or to be more kind toward this person or more whatever it is, if I bring it onto the open that I'm actually being called to do that, it'll be asking me to step forward and do it. Rollo May, the existential psychologist, he said, in Freud's age, the neurosis of the age was repressed sexuality. He said, that's hardly the neurosis of our age. He says, I think the neurosis of our age is becoming consciously aware that we're pretending that we're less than we are. Because if we admit the full potential of ourselves, we'll have to stand up and be ourselves. And even though the price paid for the half-lived life is bitter, we're afraid to do it this way. And I also think, then, see, if I think I am what's wrong with me, it'll be too shameful to bring it out. If I think I am what's wrong with me this way. You know, in AA, this is what's so powerful about AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. We have come to admit that our life has become, that we're powerless over alcohol, that our life has become unmanageable. And anyone who's in the grips of their addiction knows, therefore, that to admit that you're powerless feels like despair. Because the very thing that gets you through your day is what's destroying you, and you can't stop. And that's why the denial of the alcoholic is actually trying to keep them alive. They're in denial because it would feel, if I admit that I can't do this and I can't stop doing this, what's killing me. But there's another way, that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity. There is a presence that can achieve in me what I can achieve under the condition I have to hand myself over to the care of that higher. And that's the fragility of finding one's footing of deliverance in the world. So when one of the steps is to make a fearless inventory of all that you've done to hurt people in your addiction. So a fearful inventory is you already know enough woundedness about yourself. You're afraid to know anymore. Like, I get it. I don't need to know I'm even more messed up than I realize that I am. That's a fearful inventory. Like, oh, cripe, I wonder what else is back there. What's a fearless inventory? That no matter what I bring out into the open, there's an infinite love that's infinitely in love with me. And I'm invincibly precious in the midst of the very brokenness itself. That's salvation. Look at your own life, really. You look at your own life, what you learned in your life today about fragility, about gratitude, about sensitivity. Look how much of it maybe came to you in times of darkness. Maybe you felt so lost, you lost your way in your own life this way. And out of the darkness and the pain, you came walking out of it learning something, all the wiser for it, hopefully. And so I think that's discernment then at the psychological level of the art of discernment. So I discern it in the quiet discernment of the spirit, and then I act upon what I discern this way. And I find a resting place, or psychological, I find therapy, or just finding one person who cares about you, one person who's there for you. And how do you learn to do nurturing things? All of that, the art of discernment, to grow in self-knowledge this way. Next, religious discernment. What is religious discernment in this way? I think this is religious discernment. Religious discernment is not the interior awareness that we're living our life in the presence of God. It is that, but it's not just that. Nor is religious discernment the discernment that we're living our life in God's relationship with us. It is that. God is in relationship with us. But religious discernment is a realization that God's oneness with us is the reality of us and our nothingness without God. That's religious discernment. I want to give some examples of this, because we're not used to thinking this way, really, religiously. Religious discernment. One of the first talks I heard Merton give at the monastery on creation and discernment and so on, this way, is that ultimately speaking, just one thing is happening, that the infinite presence of God the infinite presence of God, is presencing itself. That is, it's infinitely pouring itself out and giving itself away in and as the intimate immediacy of the gift and the miracle of my very presence, the presence of others and of all things in our communal nothingness without God. So this is not like a beta, like we are God. To the contrary, it's a realization of absolute nothingness without God. God's let there be light, let there be stones and trees and stars, so on. Let there be light, let there be you, let there be me. It's our very absolute nothingness without God that makes our very presence to be the presence of God. It isn't as if I can say, I sure hope God helps me share these reflections with you. If God doesn't, I'll muddle through, but I'll make it. If God would stop loving me at the count of three, not only would the talk stop, I would disappear because I'm nothing without. We somehow imagine that we're real all by ourselves. At the count of three, God would stop loving all of you into this moment right now. At the count of three, you would all disappear. If at the count of three, God would cease loving the universe into existence, the universe would. We're not used to thinking about this. That the world is God's body, and that it's bodying forth the love that's uttering it into being. St. John of the Cross talks about walking out into the mountains. And he says through possessiveness of heart, we think we try to own it like real estate. Like I'd like to have this. He says we get a little bit deeper and we see the beloved has passed this way in haste. This way. We see traces of the beloved in the contours of the mountains, the water's edge, whatever. We go deeper still, he says, my beloved is the mountains. That the world is God's body, and that it's bodying forth the love that's uttering it into being. The darkness of the night, the sun moving across the sky, the smell of the flower, the rain. This way. And so really what we're doing there religiously is we're trying to discern this within our heart this way. This is true. And we ask God, and that's what faith is. Faith is a gift of God. It's given to us to know the truth of this through faith. And we seek to live by it. And then we're talking about little moments where we taste what faith proclaims. The little moment it flashes forth in the presence of nature, the arms of the beloved, the presence of the child, the dying loved one, the smell of flowers, the long, slow walk to no place in particular. It washes over us and it gives itself to us. And it's always true this way. And so discernment then it's so beautiful, it's subtle. I need a daily rendezvous to sit and give myself over to the truth of this. And I'd like to read you a passage in Religious Discernment in Thomas Merton. This is in his little book, Thoughts in Solitude. And probably heard it. You see it quoted a lot. I'll read the prayer and I'll walk through it. This is religious discernment. I'll read it first and walk through it. My Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I'm following your will does not mean I'm actually doing so. But I believe the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore, I will trust you always, though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. That's a lovely prayer. I'd like to walk through it this way, as religious discernment. He begins first with a litany of acknowledgments of his limitations. And he's talking to God. This way he's telling God, my Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. Like the unforeseeable. Look how often in your life you're in a situation and you're assuming how it's going to turn out. It didn't turn out that way at all. You know, here I'm in Marina Del Rey, there are horrible fires here. in Malibu and south of here. And a woman was supposed to come see me uh, yesterday for lunch. She did a doctor in Julian of Norwich. She lives right down the street here. And they just bought they built this beautiful home 2 years ago, burnt to the ground. I live in a 3-unit condo out on the beach. I live on the top floor of the oceans out here. The lady who owns the second floor unit downstairs, they had a big home in Pacific Palisades, burnt to the ground. You've seen the pictures of it, like the apocalypse. So didn't see that one coming. Just, my daughter, the hospice nurse, the fire started, they had to evacuate their home. The fire was headed toward their house. The wind shifted. Their house is safe. And so we don't know what's going to happen next, around the next bend. We don't see the joy that's coming. We don't see the next painful thing that's coming this way. My Lord God, I have no idea. And in fact, I think I know where. And by the way, when he wrote this, he didn't know that he was going to die on a visit to Bangkok to die in dialogue at a conference, and he was going to be electrocuted to death. This way, 53 years old, he didn't know that, where it's going to. So, and you don't know where your death is coming either. My Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I think I do. There's certain probabilities that around the next bend, the next surprise is already in the mail. It's already on its way. Life's like that. I cannot know for certain where it will end, how it will end, nor do I really know myself. I'm not who I think I am. No idea of me is me. In other words, another way of putting it is this: I'm not who my father said that I was. I'm not who my mother said that I was. My lover, my spouse, my pastor, my boss. I'm not even who I think I am. But can I join God in who God eternally knows me to be, hidden with Christ and God before the origins of the universe? Can I be delivered from the ideology of my opinions about myself and my opinions about others, prejudiced towards myself? Nor do I really know myself. And that's why Thomas Merton says, and when it comes to the ways of God, to know that to understand is to realize that you're infinitely understood. That's the thing. Can I join God in who God eternally knows me to be, hidden with Christ in God forever? And can I join you in that you'll reveal it to me in my heart this way? And the fact I think I'm following your will does not mean I'm actually doing so, because I've been confused before. I'm subject to self-deception. I am this way. This is why I have to always try to stay open and receptive, to be willing to see a certain pattern that I'm going through. It needs to be really rethought this way, and to rethink it and let a deeper light shine in this way. But I believe the desire to please you does in fact please you. As confused as I might be, Lord, you are never confused. Never this way. But I believe, therefore, the desire to please you by sincerity. What else? Thomas Merton said, with God, a little sincerity goes a long, long way. And we're sincere, but we have to stay vulnerable in the sincerity and be receptively open to what comes to us. So we're being invited to look at it and walk in it, to keep the doors of our heart ajar and open and supple. And I hope I have that desire in all that I'm doing, that I walk the walk in the sincerity of doing your will. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you'll lead me by the right road. And here's a great sentence. This is the mystical part where it becomes useful. These helicopters go along the beach back and forth. That was. I know that if I do this, you'll lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing. That if I am sincere, as confused as I might be in my wayward ways, as confused as I might be, I will be on the right road because you're with me in it. That's why. And the sincerity of my desire, my confusion. Therefore, I will trust you always, though I may seem to be lost. And in the shadow of death, I may seem to be lost, but ultimately I'm not lost at all, because you never lose me. That's why I'm never lost. Ever, ever, ever. You're closer to me than I am to myself. I can't be lost in your arms. and in the shadow of death. Because what is death at the gate of heaven? That's the downside about heaven. Only the dead need apply. We're all headed towards our death. But our hope is that when we die, we're not annihilated, but consummated. We'll move forever from veiled ways of experiencing God's presence to eternal unveiled ways of experiencing God's presence. I will not fear. It doesn't mean that I won't be afraid, but I won't be afraid of being afraid. I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. That's a lovely prayer. And so religious discernment is the discerning, the refine. That's what spiritual direction is about. That means the police are following somebody. They try to run away and they follow them on the plane. So let's hope it stops. So this is religious discernment this way. What is mystical discernment? What is mystical discernment? And here's the way I put it with Richard Rohr, and I want to say it now with you. This one. Religious discernment is a realization that in these moments that we've been speaking, that in this kind of a descent, in this kind of a descent into ever deeper, more interior dimensions of myself, I discover the interior, deeper dimensions of myself bottom out and open out upon the abyss-like infinite presence of you, welling up and giving yourself to me whole and complete in and as the intimate immediacy of this moment, just as it is, which renders it unexplainably holy in all directions. I want to share with you a story. I can go on, can't I? I'll just go on with the noise. When we do a broadcast for the thing, we always have to. By the way, this is living the contemplative life in the midst of the world. See, are we to think that noise is some rude intrusion into our mystical insights? But realize, you know why the helicopters are going over? There's a problem somewhere, and somebody's in danger. That's why. And that person, whoever it is, they're our brother or our sister. And whoever is doing what they're doing to them, the police are catching, the perpetrator is also our brother or our sister. Life goes on and on and on this way. And that's the providential nature of the helicopter going over, lest we forget. Lest we forget. See, we don't want to say, oh, it's beyond the suffering of the world. I'm a mystic in the making. Don't bother me. The fidelity of the mystic, it radicalizes our oneness with the suffering of the world. So Thomas Merton had insomnia. Says suddenly the bed becomes an altar, and in a distant city somewhere, someone is suddenly able to pray. Our suffering doesn't belong to us. We're woven into each other. We belong to each other in our suffering, and we're woven into each other in the suffering, in the love that loves us so and sustains us in the suffering, and loves us so in the joys, and the delights, and the pleasures of our life this way. And so mystical realization then is a kind of a quiet fulfillment of this fleetingly realized, and then living in the desire to abide there in the sincerity of our heart and the unfolding of our ways. I would now like to, I think I have 15 more minutes, I think. How many more minutes do I have? Somebody help me. Appreciate it.
You have 15, or you have 25 more minutes until
That's what I
12:15.
thought. Good. Okay, good.
About 10.
I have peripheral neuropathy. I have peripheral neuropathy and diabetic nerve pain And I use a cane because I fall over. I'm losing my balance, and it's also affecting my hands. I've had it for a long time. And so I use a cane so I don't fall, because I don't want to fall over, I don't want to fall. And I keep forgetting where I left my cane. So you need a cane, you know you have a problem. If you can't remember where you left your cane, you have two problems. It isn't just that you're losing the ability to walk, your ability to remember anything at all. And I'm unraveling you before your very eyes. That's why I need your help to have mercy on me. But here's the thing, it's unexplainably more than okay. Because although I die, I do not die. And the eternality of myself is shining out through the sincerity, which what I'm channeling now through you, what was given to me in the monastery, because it touched me so. And I hope that you're touched by it in the ordinariness of your life. I'd like to talk about this to a couple other mystics. One is Teresa of Avila on the interior castle. And Teresa of Avila, you know, if you read the interior castle, she says she had this poetic image, it's on prayer, that the soul is like a castle made of crystal or diamond, like a huge castle. And also it's interesting, see, the kingdom of heaven is within you. And so if heaven is where God lives, and if God is within you, your soul is God's heaven. Your soul is God's heaven in the castle of your soul. And she said that in this castle of your soul, there are mansions or dwelling places, like concentric circles. And each dwelling place is an incremental degree into realization of God's one with you. And in the seventh innermost mansion, God's in there waiting for you, in there to give you a big hug, a big eternal hug. So some people are so there are these mansions, and the first three are psychological spiritual maturity. So she says there's some people, they don't even know they have a soul. They're so caught up in the external realities of their life. Like I'm just nothing but what I do, what I achieve or I don't achieve, my complexities. But then it dawns on you, if my life has an outside, it must have an inside. There's a certain moment in solitude or a moment of love found or love lost. There's a certain moment where you're quickened to the interiority of God's oneness in your life, and you enter the first mansion of the soul, the special way of life. And she said, in this beginning stage of devotional sincerity, is that you're just beginning to practice devotional sincerity with God this way. She said, there's troubles in there. She said, because you realized when you came into that castle, you were careless and reptiles got in with you. And these reptiles are chasing you around the interior life. In other words, you say this to God, you know, I could be so holy if I didn't have to live my life. I think I could be so holy if I didn't have to be me, if I could get past the foibles of myself this way. And so we struggle with these things. We struggle and struggle and struggle, and we get to a door, and the door between each of these castles has three times. One hinge of the door is humility. The other hinge of the door is experiential self-knowledge. And the third hinge is prayer. So through prayer, through humility, through self-knowledge, we move into the second mansion, and it gets a little deeper in the second mansion. And this, I think, where spirituality touches psychotherapy. It isn't as if we were careless when we got in there and the reptiles got in with us. Resentment, anger, jealousy, self-loathing, brokenness that overtakes us now and again. It isn't like that. Really what happened, we're traumatically bonded to what compromises the hopes of our heart. As a matter of fact, we slip out at night and we're quietly dating the reptiles. See, we're not yet, it's like the alcoholic. The only thing to be admitted to AA is the desire to, you can come to the meeting drunk every night. You come to the meeting, everyone's welcome. But sometimes there's active waiting. You're actively waiting where you don't yet have the strength to do it, but you're waiting for when it happens. And you realize you're ritualistically reenacting the patterns of your resentment, your jealousy, your self-loathing, your fears, your half-heartedness, and so on. You're kind of bonded to them this way. They have a hold on you. Just as you struggle with that and you work with this and through the months and all this, you have your life, I have mine. And you get to the third mansion. And the third mansion is psychological spiritual maturity. You're not as crazy as you used to be. You're not as chaotic as you used to be. You're more stably grounded in who you are in the presence of God. You're so grateful. And the people who live with you are grateful because living with you has not been a walk in the park. They're so pleased because God wants us to have a healthy ego. Because when our ego isn't healthy, the lack of healthiness spills over on other people around us. They say to us, I sure wish you'd work on your ego. That's what therapy is. How can I heal from ritualized patterns that hurt myself and hurt other people? And so in the third mansion, you kind of reach cruising altitude in a heightened, more stable sense of psychological, spiritual maturity. Would that there were more three-mansion people in the world this way. It's a gift. It's a gift, and it's a gift. She said, and also this is where it starts shining through the special way of life. Through your Lectio Divina, your discursive meditation, your prayer, you learn to see how God is stabilizing the intimate ways and attitude towards your own body, towards your mind, for the people you live with, for the world. This way, you're living out the unfolding of your deepening sincerity of your ordinariness this way. It's a gift to be a third mansion person. She says the trouble with third mansion life is that reason has not yet been conquered by love. It's entirely too reasonable. She said people in the third mansion, they do go sailing, but they're always careful to keep the shore in view. I will venture out, Lord, and surrendering myself over into you, transforming me into yourself, as long as I can circle back and mark off where I left off in my life, to get back on my sense of who I am and where I'm going. As long as I can still do that, I think that's the problem with it. It's entirely too reasonable. That it's not yet been conquered by love. And how does this? So the fourth mansion is the conquering. And how does this happen? Here's how she describes it. We already saw the cloud of anointing. We already saw the author of the cloud described it this way. They were living the special way of life, and from time to time there's a blind stirring of love in our inmost being. That is, we're quickened with a taste of oneness, deeper than thought, deeper than emotion, and then we learn to abide in the oneness of fleetingly glimpse. This is how every mystic has their own way of saying this. You kind of see where this sits with you, to what extent you've experienced it this way. She says, you're sitting there in prayer, your Lectio Divina, the scriptures are open, and you're sitting there in your devotional sincerity. And here's what she says. As you sit there, she said, imagine a basin filling with water. And it keeps filling, and it starts to overflow. But what if instead of overflowing, what if the basin kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger to accommodate the water flowing into it? And she realized that's what's happening to your heart. So you're sitting there like this in prayer, and the love of God, like water, this infinite love is flowing into you. And it's overflowing, it's coming into your heart. But instead of your heart overflowing, your heart is expanding and expanding out into boundaryless proportions of infinite love. And the prayer is that you surrender to that. That's the beginning of the mystical way. It's extremely subtle. It's so subtle. And it's very hard to talk about this. It's very hard to talk about. Thomas Merton, I was once talking with Merton in a direction where I was having these experiences. And he said to me, once in a while, you'll find somebody with whom you can talk about such things, but they're hard to find. A lot of people don't even know they exist. Other people, they exist, but you can put it off till later. But what's the imperative of your awakened heart? Like a subtle urgency, a need to surrender yourself over to the love that's surrendered over to you this way. And your heart's being enlarged to divine proportions, and you don't understand what's happening to you this way. This. And then in the fifth mansion, she says it gets deeper and deeper. She says, what happens in the fifth mansion is that the oneness becomes so subtle. The oneness becomes so delicate that you're no longer able to maintain awareness of yourself and reflective consciousness, and you disappear into the oneness. The example she uses is a silkworm. She said the silkworm spins a cocoon around itself, a chrysalis. She says cocoon, chrysalis, whatever. Spins a cocoon, and it disappears from view. And she said, and just like you disappear from yourself, you're sitting there in prayer. She said, this disappearing from yourself, it might just last a few seconds, it might last a half an hour. But the oneness becomes so refined, you can no longer maintain awareness of yourself and reflective consciousness. She says, but then what happens when the when the cocoon opens up, it comes out as a butterfly. She said, who would believe it? Who would believe it? And she says, this is what's happening in the quietness in which you can't see yourself. You're being metamorphosized by infinite love into infinite love. And when you reappear back in reflective consciousness, you don't know if anything happened because you weren't there. But you do know because there's 3 signs by which you discern this. The first sign is this: you only want to do God's will. Take me, break me, make me your own. Do with me what you will, Lord. I just want to do your will. Jesus said, my bread is to do the will of the one who sent me. But what is it, Lord, that you're asking of me? That's the only thing you want to do is God's will. The next thing is you know that you were in God and God was in you. In a way, she says, you know it's true, but you can't explain it. I will now break faith with my awakened heart. There's a certain moment. Romano Guardini, the Catholic writer, puts it this way. I know that I'm not God, but I'm not dualistically other than God either. I know I'm not any of you, but I'm not dualistically other than any of you either. I know I am not the earth, but I'm not dualistically other than the earth either. It isn't just seen poetically, but somehow you realize that you were in God and God was within you. And although you're not in it experiencing it, you know that it's always true. And then she says the last thing she says is you become like a butterfly with tattered wings, that everywhere you land, this is not the beloved, this is not the beloved, this is not the beloved. This is infinitely less than the infinite love of God, and therefore it cannot fulfill me. Imagine a woman who was married many years, and she was blessed with a very happy, fulfilling marriage. Then her husband dies. And one of her adult children drives her home from the funeral and brings her inside. And maybe it's the house where this person grew up in all these years. And he's going to drive away and he says, Mom, are you going to be okay? She said, I'll be all right. She hears his car start up in the driveway and she's alone in the empty house filled with things. And she walks through each room and each piece of furniture has memories in it. The day we got this together, we got this together, we got this together. It's an empty house filled with things, touches, because this is not the beloved. This is not the beloved. This is not the beloved. But here's the strange thing, Teresa says. It is in the deep acceptance of the realizing of the nothingness of everything we can touch, in it being infinitely less than the infinite love of God, that the infinite love of God is shining out in it. This way. That the shadowy outline of the furniture in the room is like God's mandala. And the very nothingness of the thing without God, you realize the unexplainable sacredness, the incomprehensible stature of everything, the sound of running water. Carl Jung says, how can we claim the years have taught us anything if we've not learned to listen to the secret that whispers in the brooks? St. John of the Cross says, well, when I talk this way about such things, you will know that if you've experienced it, you'll know what I'm talking about, but you won't be able to explain it to anybody because it's not explainable. It's not explainable this way. And so that's the 5th mansion. The 6th mansion is the longest one of all because it's dying the great death. It's where the last traces of identifying with anything less than an infinite love or the love of God. It's like the great unraveling. and she experienced it as physical sickness, about being misunderstood, and so on. She says in the sixth mansion, she says, she says, it always troubled her because people were very critical about her, what she was doing in the reform of the Carmel, returning to a primitive observance. And people were very critical about that she's a troublemaker and thinks of herself. And she said, other people, they think she's a saint. She said, they think I'm a saint. And she says, you know what? It bothers me more, the people who think I'm a saint. I prefer the people who are troubled by me. Other people, it's the other way around. We're troubled by the people who are troubled. We just love it when people think we're a saint. When I used to give traveling retreats, I don't do it anymore. People would come up to me and they would say to me, I've been listening to you or reading you for a long time. She said, they'll say to me, I feel so honored to be in your presence. And one voice inside of me says, really? Seriously? I try to, before I go out the door, my wife has to make sure my socks match. I'm just trying to get through another day. I'm just me, really. And another voice inside wants to say, really, I'm pleased that you're insightful enough to realize how profound I am. But by the way, if you're honored to be with me, think how honored I am to be me. But really, the whole thing is God uses me like a voice to say unthinkable things that are being channeled. My God, when I was in the monastery, Dan Walsh taught metaphysics. And when I left the monastery, I wrote Merton's Palace of Nowhere, Ultimate Identity, the Merton's Palace of Nowhere. And so I wrote a letter to Dan Walsh, and I said, I don't know how to I don't know how to teach this to people out here. I don't know how to communicate this to people out here. That we subsist in God like light subsist in flame. And Dan Walsh wrote back to me. He said, you can't communicate it, but it will communicate itself through you if you're convinced in what you say and if you are what you say. But it won't be you communicating it. And it'll be communicating it because the people listening will know something deep inside of them that matters very, very much is being awakened. Merton called it spiritual communication this way. And so for Teresa, then, the sixth mansion opens out upon the seventh mansion. And she says the difference between the sixth and the seventh mansion is this. She said, in the sixth mansion, under optimal conditions, we abide in the oneness abiding with us. So under optimal conditions, we're fine. But when trials and tribulations come, we lose it. She tells a story about crossing a river. She had to do all these travels, and she was a little one-horse wagon being drawn there. There was a huge storm, and the river was raging. The rivers was high, and the horse was pulling her little thing through the water, and it was coming up the other side. The little cart she was in tipped over, and she fell in the mud on her hands and knees. And she says, Lord, why are you letting this happen to me? He said, Teresa, this is the way I treat my friends. She said, no wonder you have so few. It's under optimal conditions, like we're all sitting here. Now look how well we're doing. I hope you're doing okay. But at home, when the unwinding starts, not so good. She said, well, the seventh mansion is this. The seventh mansion, when you reach the seventh mansion, that even in the most upsetting of times, and you really are upset, you're grounded and founded unexplainably, and you are sustained in a presence that doesn't prevent the painful thing from happening, but unexplainably is sustaining you with it till the day of your death and beyond, throughout all of eternity. This is the seventh mansion. So she says, sisters, for a person who's reached this seventh mansion, there's only one question left. This is a lovely way that she ends the book. The only thing left is, how can I be helpful? And it
Hey,
comes
James.
full. Yes.
Just letting you know that we are about 5 to 10 minutes away from the end of the
Thank you
actual
for that.
event.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
And by the way, stay on. And what happens in 10 minutes in the actual event? Then what happens?
We're done. So this next 10 minutes can be used as a question answer, or you can finish your thoughts.
What, you mean we're done for the day? Yes.
Yes, sir.
Oh, good. I'm done.
So would you like a question and answer portion
I
right now?
would. Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything not clear? Please approach the microphone. This is your last chance for clarity. I hope it goes well. I hope I know what to say. Well, seriously, does anyone have, because this is endlessly evocative, it's personal. Anybody with anything, any what ifs?
Just letting everybody know this is our last question and answer portion for James Finley.
Thank you, Dr. Finley. It seems like there are no more questions.
Sounds good to me. We'll consider it, we'll consider it God's will.
God's will.
It's God's will, and you know what? That means we're finished.
Can you send us out in prayer?
Yes, yes. I've been sending you out since we started, but I'll send you out in. I know I'll send you out in prayer. I'll send you out in prayer. In prayer. Lord God, we ask for the grace of knowing that whatever we're heading out towards is waiting for us in our own home, because you're waiting for us in the intimate unfolding of our days, just the way we are. And we ask that by being here together, it reawaken or reillumine the desire for to be ever more aware of this presence, this oneness that abides in us and sustains us unexplainably in the ordinariness of our days. And that we might become somebody in whose presence others are better able to get a glimpse of this within themselves, that the contagious energy might be passed on to another person by the way we listen to them, or the way we're vulnerable with them, or the way we're present to them, or the way we're attentive to them. We might be sensitive to such a thing as watering the house plants, or getting up alone in the middle of the night, but before dawn and just sitting in the dark empty-handed without anything to hold on to. We ask for the grace that you would teach us the patterns that are already present in our life, that are really the infinity of you woven through the details of our days. And we ask for this through your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Being here.
Thank you so much, James. Dr. Finley? Of course, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.